It's really my honor to introduce Harry Wingo from Google. Just to remind ourselves, Google is more than some left coast cyberspace company. It's planted roots in North Carolina with a data center here in Caldwell County. Google is reaching out into nearly every corner of the online world to create, expand, and innovate. And while many companies seem challenged to look beyond the next quarterly report, Google appears to be making business plans looking into the next quarter century. Harry Wingo is one of those visionaries. These days he focuses on energy and cybersecurity policy for Google. Prior to joining Google, he was Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs at Current Group, a smart grid company. Mr. Wingo has also been counsel to the Senate Commerce Committee, a special counsel in the General Counsel's Office of the FCC, a communications law associate, and a clerk in District of Columbia Court. Mr. Wingo holds a Juris Doctorate as a lawyer, so good thing I didn't tell those lawyer jokes, from Yale, and a BS, Bachelor of Science in Naval Science from U.S. Navy. And before starting a career in law and policy, he was a Navy SEAL, so it's really a good thing I didn't tell those lawyer jokes. So please join me in welcoming Harry Wingo.
Thank you, Ward, and also thank you, Seth, and thank all of you for your time and your interest this morning. And I'm really honored to be here and to kick off this event. And I'm so excited about energy. It's one of the things that I cover at Google, as Ward mentioned. I work on energy policy. I also work on cybersecurity and cloud computing issues. And first off, I'll answer a question that may be in your heads, which is, I get all the time, Google and energy. What's the connection? So there's two reasons why we care about energy at Google. The first reason, I'll start off with, it's a business reason. We use energy in our operations. And so it goes to the bottom line, and we would like to see more options for energy going forward in the future. I like to say, hell is the absence of options. So we want to make sure we don't end up there. So the other reason is corporate responsibility. Our founders, Larry and Sergey, are actually very much interested in making sure that as a company, we do the right thing on energy, and this impacts America in the sense of we want to have those options. There are huge opportunities, but there are also risks involved if we don't do the innovation that's necessary to make sure that we're ready for the future. And so that's, all of you are part of that. And I think it's just recently that a lot of attention has gone to this area. Google is working on a couple things on energy, but what I want to do is give you an overview of what Google's doing across the board on energy, but then really drill down a little bit on energy information, which from my background, as Ward mentioned, I was at a smart grid company, so that's a topic near and dear to my heart, which is just making a smarter grid. And so on energy, for Google, we've made investments. Back in 2008, I think we made over $40 million of investments in companies with a certain thing in mind. We know there's a lot of activity going on in energy, and so our main business. I've mentioned it's related to energy, or we care about energy, but let's face it, we're online. Advertising is where we get most of our dollars. We're moving into other spaces, cloud computing being one. But energy, we figured if we're going to put a limited amount of money into this, we'd like to make a difference. And so we figured doing things on a big scale or finding a company that was going to really make a difference, like have a breakthrough technology that could provide energy on an industrial scale, would make a difference. So has anyone here heard about Google's initiative, Renewable Energy, less than coal? Okay, RE less than C. Right, so we know that coal is powering the nation. It's very important, this region of the South. There's also nuclear is very important in North Carolina. But we want other sources to come online. Remember what I said about options. So what we'd like to see is wind is also big in North Carolina. I think you're in the top 10 of the nation, for resources, definitely in the summertime. So wind, geothermal, solar energy. we took a look and tried to see which companies were doing things that could really have breakthrough technology. On the wind side, we were looking at high altitude wind. We have a company called Makani Power that we make investments in. And this is really out of the box stuff. This is basically you'd put a device up at a high altitude and you'd have a tether coming down to bring the wind resources to where you need it. I could see this maybe working in a place like, I don't know, Afghanistan. On the solar side, we're really looking at concentrating solar power. So we know there's a lot of interesting things, important things going on with photovoltaics, but for us, we were looking at taking these mirrors and shining them at a central source. You've got a boiler, and trying to create power that way, and you have a lot of mirrors. We actually have engineers at our headquarters in Mountain View trying to reduce the manufacturing cost for the mirror elements. And I was out there a couple visits ago, and I heard about the team that was working on this, so I wanted to see it. And so I'm from D.C. originally in Maryland, but that day I was from Missouri. Show me, right? And so they had this element out, and they warned me, said, look, it can get kind of hot. And so I said, no, I want you to shine this on my hand. And so first they said, well, let's be safe here, and I know you're Navy SEAL and all that, but and I understand being safe, but they shone it at a car at first, and had the reflection from the sun, and you could see this bright spot where it was focusing this. And I walked over, put my hand there, and sure enough, it was pretty warm. Not warm enough to to burn my hand, but you could definitely feel the temperature change just from one element. They said if they had about 4 of those and they shone it at a tree, they could catch it on fire. Amazing, right? And so we're looking at concentrated solar power and deep geothermal, enhanced geothermal systems. That's another area where we're making investments. And this is again something where, who here has heard about deep geothermal? Okay. So this is exciting. The science, there was a big report from MIT that hit the Hill Congress was looking at about 2007. The concept is that we have heat at depth. So geothermal that most people think of is when it's just coming out of the ground. We've got some really good resources like the geysers out in California. Iceland uses a lot of stuff, but this is where you're actually trying to, I call it inshore drilling, right? And this is a sense, there's places all over the nation. In fact, every state has this resource. It's better in a lot of places out to the west, but you have it coming over to Texas. Arkansas has some. And we may actually, as we continue to look at where the resources are, there may be some more options out east, but you could do it all across the country, but some places are better than others. You drill from anywhere from 2 to 8 miles down through hard rock, and that's the catch. You have to get the drilling cost down. But once we figure out how to get the drilling cost reduced for deep geothermal, you could put steel into the ground, and you'd be able to fracture the rock, and you do that using some of the same techniques that the oil and gas industry use. You create fissures in the granite that's down at depth, and then you just create a steam cycle, and then you've got a power plant. And you would have to manage the resource, because if you draw the heat out of the ground too fast, you could deplete the well sooner than you need to. But this is something that people think could last about 40 years on a well. And then you do sort of a crop rotation approach, where you have different wells in the field, and you draw off and you draw down on others, and you could basically have a perpetual field where you're having base load power. That's another thing that's very exciting about deep geothermal if we can move forward on it. We've made investments in 2 companies, Alta Rock and Potter Drilling, that are working on the technology to lower the drilling costs. For me, I see this as something that this is huge impact for jobs if we get this right, putting steel into the ground, and I look at it as kind of a roughneck stimulus. The guys who are doing oil and gas around the country would be able to repurpose, pivot, and work on this issue. The other things in Google, we've made investments. We've looked at electric vehicles, which I personally am very excited about for a number of reasons. So we've got 8 cars at our headquarters in Mountain View, California. We've got charging stations all around the campus. And one of our founders drives one of these Teslas. Is anyone, I'm sure, aware of Teslas? I see heads nodding. I want one, but they're about $100,000. But one of our founders drives this all-electric car to work. He's got a parking station, you can charge it. But we're looking at those. But then on energy information and smart grid is one of the key areas where we're doing a lot of work on policy. And we have a product called Power Meter. Power Meter is free software that we are putting out there. We're already working with some utilities, including San Diego Gas and Electric, Encore, some municipals and co-ops around the country. But we're also doing some work around the world, the utility in India, one in Germany, and we're looking to sign up any other partners that we can get. And what Power Meter does is if you put a smart meter in, and I know there's been a lot of attention on meters, and a meter goes in, but the question is, how do you get that information to consumers, and how do you make it useful and something that they can use? Right now, what happens with electricity is you don't get the bill till the end of the month, and people are aware of it. It's a very, it's a high cost, but I think what's happened is people have just gotten to the point where they're not paying as much attention to their bills. I mean, they look at it, but we think that there would be an important feedback loop if you were able to put that information in front of people more regularly, maybe every day, maybe whenever people want to look at it. And there's been research that shows just being aware alone could lead to reductions in consumption of 10 to 15%. And so what Power Meter does is if a utility has these meters in place, they're taking this information, they're taking it back, they're making it billing quality, then they've got it on their servers. And what we would like to see is if a consumer has a Gmail account, which is free, and we're not the only company doing this. You could go with Microsoft. They've got a version called Home. But if you allow third parties who the consumers are already using throughout the day, to check emails, to do searches, and for Google we have a search page that you can personalize. We call it iGoogle. So you can put your sports scores, the weather report locally, joke of the day, quotes, maybe your favorite, whatever it is that you want. But you can put a gadget there. One of those boxes could be your Power Meter box. So imagine if you're at work or even on your smartphone, you can open this up anytime you want, and there would be this graph that shows what your electricity use was. And that's just the simple version. There's a lot of portals. A lot of companies are looking at energy portals. In fact, utilities that are putting in meters are looking at doing their own portals. But what we're trying to do differently with Power Meter is we want this to be an open gadget that anyone can develop anything for to overlay it. So you can start out with the basic version where I wonder what my electricity usage has been for the past month. Or maybe I open up the window. If you've ever used these stock charts and you look at the stocks for what happened this month, what happened over the year, or you open it up all the way to 10 years, well, eventually that's the sort of thing that people will be able to do with their energy information, and we think it's going to be make a big difference. And so Ward mentioned Homestar and mentioned weatherization. So I think there's a real synergy or possibility for these things to work together, because as people are educated about what they're doing with energy, they're going to realize that there's money on the table, that they can have savings, they can evaluate what their usage is, and they're going to actually be inspired to take action and do something about that. So that's going to, you're going to create a virtuous cycle where we get consumers engaged, we get them wanting to learn more about their energy use and consumption, and then taking action to improve it. But if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. So that's what we're trying to do. That's our approach to smart grid, to energy information, is let's educate consumers, let's empower them, and let's inspire them to take action. And that's going to have a benefit across the board for a lot of reasons. So smart grid, let's unpack that term. A lot of times when I mention smart grid, I get a reaction from some of the utilities who appropriately they'll say, we've kept the lights on for decades, and they have. They do a great job on that. There's intelligence. The grid is smart in certain places. If you go upstream from the substation, of course, and you're going back to generation, and you're going in a regional sense, what the ISOs are doing, and that, and power wheeling, a lot of intelligence in the system there. They could improve, but they're doing a lot there. But once you get to the substation, and you go out through those feeder lines, you do the distribution network throughout the neighborhood, there's a lot to be done there. Progress Energy is an example. They are doing a lot on that side. I had a chance to talk with some folks from there. I was very impressed with the fact that they want to increase efficiencies out of the substation, which is a big deal. If you made just the distribution network just 3% more efficient, savings would be immense. They're also looking at using smart grid on the distribution lines, the utilities are, to prevent outages and blackouts and actually deal with them more rapidly when they do occur. That's a lot of money. People, if you look at that and you look at how much it costs, to get the crews in, or if you have a big ice storm or something else takes your lines down, sometimes you have to go out of state. There's things that go in the budget for that. As smart grid comes into place, we can be more smarter about how we one, prevent things happening in the first place, or two, if there is a break in the line, being able to pinpoint that, deal with it more rapidly. In Queens, New York, there was an outage, I think in 2006, went on for 10 days. 10 days. There was an irate local politician who said, I could have put a 12-year-old on a bicycle and they would have found this quicker than you did. But in the utilities defense, smart grid has been something that's been, the idea has been around for a while, but we've been waiting for computing, for a lot of these options that we can do with communications, with sensors, and with IT to catch up. And so it's almost there to the point where everybody's embracing it. But we have to work through these dockets. These are things that North Carolina is just getting started, I think, on rolling out smart meters, rolling out improvements to the grid across the board. And so I've walked through like the utility side. They're looking at a lot of options for making the grid smarter. We're focusing on the node where the consumers are. And so being able to tell how much energy you're using at your house, let's think about the 10 to 15% reduction just by being aware alone. So I know you've got legislation that went in place recently that sets a portfolio standard for both renewable energy, but also for energy efficiency. So let's think a minute. If you were able to look at this as infrastructure, I think that's something utilities would really want policymakers to consider. If you could say, consider this as an investment. And this is something that citizens should also be aware of or care about. If we can take bits and communications and software, and we can make those investments instead of investments in cement, steel, building new plants before we have new wind options or new renewable energy options online. If we can make those investments, sometimes they can cost a lot less, because you're really looking at efficiencies in the system and squeezing efficiencies out, and this is like power. This is something that Duke has talked about a lot. I know Duke's CEO was here last year, and their concept of really using smart grid and considering information to provide power in a way, negative power. You have Jim Rogers calling it negawatts, but that concept is really important for the smart grid. And peak is one of the things to focus on in the short term or the near term, in the sense that we overbuild our grid. We have to, because we don't have that information in a real-time sense to know what consumers are going to do. We can predict it. We kind of have averages, but it's like the freeway. You don't build it for driving at 2 a.m. You build it for rush hour. But what we can do with changing people's behavior, giving them price signals, can have huge implications for how soon we have to build the next lane or couple lanes on that freeway, and also impacts whether those lanes are going to be green or not if we give ourselves enough time. So when I think about smart grid, I think about education, but also evaluating, because smart grid is going to provide a tool for policymakers to evaluate, for utilities to evaluate their options, but more importantly for consumers to have the freedom to know exactly what's going on in their homes. Imagine going to the grocery store. If you had to go to the grocery store and there were no prices on any of the stuff you wanted to buy, that alone would be a problem. But then if you got up to the checkout, and you say, okay, well, they're just going to tell me how much this costs. And they tell you, oh, don't worry about it. We'll give you the bill at the end of the month. It'd be kind of strange, right? That's how we buy electricity. That's how we buy electricity right now. So we can fix that. Or if you went to, fill up your truck at the gas station, and somebody covered the numbers up. And again, they said, don't worry. we'll send you the bill at the end of the month. So that's, you can see, if we're looking at a very important switch that we have a chance to turn on. And that switch has to do with consumers' minds, really. Like what they see, what they can envision on their power use, and getting them engaged. That's a really powerful switch to turn on. There are controversies with smart grid, of course. If you don't turn that switch on in the right way, because in addition to informing consumers, which we think is very important, one of the things that can come with smart grid is the ability to send price signals. to move on to the next step, which would be smart billing and smart pricing. But I guarantee you, if you haven't given consumers the option ahead of time to prepare for that, by educating themselves, by empowering themselves to turn to weatherization, to think about insulation, to think about those new windows I should buy from that shop that I know, is down the street. If you don't do that, if you don't give consumers that opportunity ahead of time to get ready for the changes that are going to be put in place, you can have a backlash. And we're seeing that in some places around the country. Right now, when I talk about the context of smart grid, does the word Bakersfield mean anything to anyone? Raise a hand. Okay, I see some folks who've been following. That's something that's going on in California with the event that some consumers didn't maybe get the preparation that was necessary on education, but there's also some misinformation about smart grid as well. So you really want to give people the chance to inform themselves. So there are other options too with smart grid. You've got the meters that are going in, but you can also, if you want, buy a device for maybe $100. The prices are going to fall, and you can put a device on your own fuse box, and then send the information. This is really neat. This is something that folks are doing at Google. I've got a power meter myself. Actually, I just moved houses, so I had one, and I haven't installed it in my new house yet, but I can't wait to. But when I had it up in my house, this thing just takes the reading at your fuse box, sends it through one of your electric lines to an outlet, and then there you plug in a device that works kind of like, treats the electricity outlet like a modem, and it grabs that real-time information that's coming in from your fuse box and has a readout right there that tells you how much power you're using. And the little device has a couple different functions. You can push buttons and see what your use was, compare it, but that's not good enough. For Google, our mission is to organize the world's information and to make it universally accessible and useful. Like, no kidding, that's our mission statement. And so it's not good enough to have that, for us in Google terms, to have that sitting in your house where maybe I see it at the end of the day. It's an improvement. It's better than having it at the end of the month. But we want people to get it wherever they are, whenever they want it. And so with that setup, if you go through the fuse box, you can take that device, plug it into your DSL line or your cable line, and it shoots out to the web, and it goes to one of our data centers, and we store that information for you securely. We respect your privacy, but anytime you want to pull it out, you could be searching on your smartphone, and your power meter would pop up. And here's another thing that is going to be possible, because we have an approach to this where we believe in open protocols. We're making the code public, so other developers can write things that you can put on top. You can trick your power meter out, if you so to speak. So if I want the overlay of all the weather that's going on, and historically I could do the weather over time, so that when it comes to the end of the year and I look back and I go, okay, this is why my bill did these things, and I can correlate it to weather changes. Or maybe if I want to get the feed from the power suppliers and look at what the cost of electricity is. If we make that available, someone's going to write a program that's going to put that feed over top of your power meter device, and you'll have a greater understanding of what's going on. And then finally, one of the things that Google is proud to be involved with is this idea of social media. It's big. How many people here are either on Twitter, Facebook, Buzz? Raise hands. Okay. So I was talking about this. This is, on energy, you've got all the technology, you've got the policy implications, but one thing I would encourage, not just utilities, but also each of you, if you're a policymaker, if you're a vendor, whatever your involvement is, an educator, very important, get your blog on. I said that, get your blog on. And kind of like vernacular speaking, get on a blog, write a blog, read blogs. You gotta have that. We have to harness the power of all this social media that's out there. And so what I described on being able to change your power meter gadget, to put in whatever you want, any information feeds, to layer over it and educate yourself, empower yourself, inspire yourself with this energy information. One really powerful aspect that you don't want to miss is social media. So what we'll see is once we liberate this information for consumers and allow them to get it, allow them to do different things with this information, one thing that some consumers are going to want to do is share that information. And so you could have consumers organizing themselves into neighborhood groups. And if you want to compare, or maybe by zip code, and if you want to make your information available, you'd be able to do that. And that is going to be a really powerful thing, because you can compare what am I doing that's wrong, and why is my per square footage of my house, why am I paying this much more for my energy than I am? And I could ask the question, and all of a sudden, some other user will say, have you tried this? And then a light bulb will go off. Oh, I haven't. I'm inspired. So I'm going to go make these changes. And this, again, will be a virtuous cycle, and it's going to impact businesses, small businesses that are in this space on doing upgrades, retrofits, weatherization. All of these things are going to be important, but more importantly, you're going to have empowered consumers to be engaged, to participate in this challenge that we have on energy, and it is a big challenge. And one final thing I'll say about education is that North Carolina is just doing great things on higher education, and I'm sure you're continuing to make strides on K through 12. Let's not forget that we have to put this in the curriculum. This is a national challenge, a very important thing that implicates national security. I mentioned that I really love electric vehicles. One of the reasons why is I see freedom in that. I see freedom from foreign oil. If we look at what we have to do with the Middle East and the implications for, imagine if we were free. If we took the resources we have in North Carolina and you were able to, one thing I'd love to see an electric truck. I really think, practically speaking, a lot of people are interested. They say, oh yeah, I know there's a leaf coming out. It's great. I'm excited about that. We're getting past people being worried about getting stuck or stranded. But I really think that until you can show somebody a truck, right? This is me personally. I think that's really going to get us past a certain point on electric vehicles. But the options across the board for energy, for making sure that we're ready for the next generation, for I believe in global warming, that we have the impact on the environment, and so we have policymakers looking at those things too. Smart grid is going to help with this, but we've got to empower consumers by giving them their energy information. So just wanted to share those thoughts with you. I appreciate your time and your interest, and if there are any questions, we have time, right, for a few? Okay.